Who knows what actually happened in history, but I felt like I had to go with something that brought me to a place, regardless of what was written down, because we know that that's all histories are partial, and all thinking has holes in it. All paradigms are incomplete, and you don't know that until you get to some other paradigm that enfolds this other one where you can see it.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological. What did you know about ice cream before someone told you about it? Or applesauce, dogs, thunderstorms, cashmere sweaters, or tulips? How do we know anything apart from the stories, the definitions, and the accumulation of labels that we attach to experience? How often do you engage the object of your attention without a running commentary of comparison, judgment, desire, or for that matter, aversion? What does it feel like to, for a moment, drop what you're telling yourself about your unfolding experience and simply inhabit the actual experience yourself? How is it for you to suspend the ongoing storyline, if even for just the space of a few breaths, to observe the running commentary and the opinions, the nattering voices of your mother, the evening news, something you read in an 8-bullet point list of must-dos from the internet, and the entire cacophony of other people's descriptions of the world that have also become your own? Where are you without the comfort and familiarity of your story? Who are you if you're not that shy kid who got dropped off to nursery school wondering, what did you do to deserve excommunication from the comfort of your home? Who are you if you're not that person who was the top of your class, or the type A businessman who could always make it rain, or the dutiful daughter who could not raise her voice? It is so easy to mistake the cherry-picked moments of history and imagination for who we truly are. Our descriptions of the world blind us to the world. We have a feeling or a thought about the actions of somebody we care about, and we use it as proof about how we think they are and who we think we are. Can you look in the mirror without commenting to yourself, too much of this or too little of that? What do you know about anything beyond what you tell yourself about it? I'm not suggesting the stories we tell ourselves are a problem or aren't somehow trustworthy, although that indeed could be the case. I'm more concerned with telling a more textured and nuanced story, one that includes both sides of an argument, one that brings in the perspective of the spider living in your houseplant, the songbirds in your backyard, or the maple serenading you with its scarlet song of fall. What I'm most curious about is the way the telling of the past shifts the present, and how that can set a new trajectory for the future. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
What are the bounds of the possible, and how do we determine what is and is not within the range of capability? Our practices give us the opportunity to discover not just how medicine works, but how we work with it. In a moment, we're going to get into a conversation with Ben Hawes on some discoveries that he's made, both with his hands-on acupuncture, but also something he's discovered about engaging the mind and how that seems to help people even if he can't put his hands on them. It's altogether a curious thing, and something he's both surprised and skeptical about, even as he finds himself in the midst of these experiences. You know, it's true that our practices become our teachers. It can be surprising what we discover along the way. Let's listen into some of what Ben has discovered. Ben Hawes, welcome to Geological.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
There are a number of things that I'm excited to talk with you about today. One is the acupuncture that you do and some innovative and unique ways that you have of looking at and palpating not the belly, but the vertebral spine to get some information. I'm looking forward to talking with you about that. And I'm also looking forward to getting into the word esoteric floats around in my mind, but I always get nervous around that word.
Yeah, well, it's usually involves a whole lot of numbers and theories. So I'm not usually about that. So it might be less intimidating than you might think. So
okay, well, we're going to find out. There's some interesting things that you're doing with treatment, and we're going to get into that later. But I want to start with something that you wrote on your blog, which is quite delightful, and I recommend all y'all's listening to go have a read. There's something you said. You said, for a long time, I've considered myself an outsider in my own field of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I'm curious to know more about that.
I mean, I almost got into Chinese medicine in an offhand way. I was out of college. I had just come back from doing 2 consecutive 3-month silent Zen meditation retreats, and I was just doing temp jobs, living at Cambridge Zen Center, Cambridge, Mass, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I wanted to do something that would, kind of tangibly help people, but wasn't really getting any luck in terms of thinking about what I wanted to do. Then I there was someone at the Zen Center who was a acupuncturist and part-time instructor at the New England School of Acupuncture, and I looked into it, and I'd gotten acupuncture. I'd, gotten some, I enjoyed it. I was kind of equivocal about how much it actually did for me, but Chinese herbal medicine actually had done a lot for me in terms of curing my chronic sinus infection. So, and I tried everything before then, and so I was kind of amazed, as a lot of us are when we start doing, as patients doing Chinese medicine, that it actually works. Because like our patients that we see, so many come to us after nothing works, and then you try so many alternatives and they don't work. I tried homeopathy, I tried naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, but nothing really worked. So instead, I tried Chinese medicine, and it was the first thing that got me off my antibiotics. And then I would just, take a formula at the start of a sinus infection, and it would go away. And then the dietary ideas from Chinese medicine, I started to apply some of those, maybe cut down on the spicy food, that sort of thing. I really was interested and believed in the Chinese herbal medicine. So I was like, okay. I looked at the requirements for going to school. I was like, I can actually do this. I don't have to do any prerequisites. I was a, religious studies major in college, so I didn't have pre-med stuff. So anything that required prerequisites for 2 years, I was like, I just don't want to spin my wheels for another couple of years. So
it was easy to get in.
Yeah. So I'm admitting that I got into Chinese medicine because of low bar for entry at the time. It's gotten a lot tougher now, but this was 98 when I got started.
98 is when they let me loose with a license.
And they had just come out with master's programs just a little bit prior to that. So I got into there, but almost immediately, as soon as I started in there, I just felt like, is this real? And almost embarrassed by just like our outsider's place and the contempt either the contempt or ignorance that existed outside of the medicine for the medicine. And so I immediately hatched plans to, after acupuncture school, go to medical school. And then I would be like, oh, best of both worlds. I would have the authority, right? I would have the authority, and people would believe me. They wouldn't look at me funny.
Authority of an MD.
Exactly, right. And they wouldn't look at me funny, all this sort of stuff. So I looked at that seriously. But then one interesting thing that happened to me when I was in acupuncture school is I started studying with Dr. John Meyerson, who he taught the 1 3-hour course at NISA, the shamanic origins of Chinese medicine. I can't really remember that much about what he was saying in the course, but I had an amazing experience of, I guess, his person or his power during the course. And so I came up, and he didn't talk about that at all. He didn't talk about himself at all. This was all just about history. And so I went up to him, and I was like, and I wrote about this in that article you wrote, and I was like, something weird is going on in this classroom. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, okay, well, here's my card. So then I started studying with him, and that started pushing me in kind of a lateral direction, in a way pushing me towards continuing on with Chinese medicine, just Chinese medicine, but in a way that wasn't because I was really into the theory of Chinese medicine, or even that I even believed in acupuncture. I mean, I was ambivalent about acupuncture till I had been practicing for a few years and started to see better results. I believe in Chinese herbal medicine, but the interesting thing is that you're really interested in Chinese herbal medicine, then you get out of school, and my experience was most people just wanted acupuncture. So I had to get really good at acupuncture, and I had to start believing in it. But the shamanic stuff, I was also kind of, I was very reluctant to engage in it, but it was so phenomenologically interesting that I decided that I'm going to just see this through and see what happens here. And so that kind of got me started on some other paths. As my mind started kind of allowing itself to go in some other directions, I started doing some writing, and then I had kids. And so then, like, after that happened, I was like, okay, medical school is not going to happen. So I have to figure out what my role is and where I am within Chinese medicine. But I still never felt that comfortable. And I found all kinds of other things to do that I considered, okay, I'm going to become a writer now. And so I did that for a while. I actually wrote a novel, and it was complicated reasons, but it almost got published. And then the agent that I had a tragedy in his family, disappeared, and that kind of like went by the wayside. And so by that time I was making music, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to pursue this. So I started making music, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this now. And acupuncture is my day job. It's I'm helping people, but really this is the cool stuff, because I just never felt cool as an acupuncturist. It's not a cool thing. People look at you funny. It's a hard thing to explain to people. Everybody has the wrong idea about it. So I had all this kind of unresolved karma from when I was younger. I wanted to write, I wanted to make music, all this sort of stuff. And so it took me a while till I kind of exhausted all that karma, until I really started to kind of come around back to Chinese medicine and acupuncture as something that was actually really interesting to me. And it was really once I started to see this, what my contribution would be, doing this like spinal palpation and acupuncture that I called bacupuncture, because mainly because the URL was available. I mean, why not? I started doing that and seeing some really interesting things happen, where I was able to start perceiving things in my patients in ways that I couldn't explain. And also seeing what I was doing might have even potential research implications in terms of using the spine as a proxy for what the distal points are doing. You might be able to measure what's happening in an objective way. So it started to become more interesting to me. And so I circled back around. So it's been like a long orbit from starting in Chinese medicine to coming back to it and feeling like I'm in it. I started assistant clinical supervisor at CSTCM part-time. I've kind of been on hiatus while I started writing this book, but COVID kind of interrupted things there. But I also taught an NCCAOM course for one day. So I've gotten back in and more accepting my role as actually being within the medicine, but still what I do is a little bit different, a little bit outside, sometimes very outside. And so when you're already in an outsider profession and you're feeling outside from that, I mean,
You're really on the
where
outside.
are you? Yeah, exactly. You're out in the microwave background radiation. You're just you're out there.
Yeah. You followed the circuitous path, and you and I might be kindred spirits in that way. For me, whenever I've tried to follow the straight path, it always branches. The thing that's right in front of me that I think is the thing is never the thing.
Yep.
It comes in from the side. It's like a little glimmer. It's on the edge, and it's like, huh, what's that? And you follow, and the next thing you know, oh, it's kind of coming into view. There's something here, but it's still not quite in your focus. It's just in your environment. At least that's been my experience. I followed acupuncture because I got curious about it, and I decided I wasn't going to do high tech anymore, because I was looking at all the kids that were coming in that were like 12 years younger than me, who had already forgotten more than I would ever learn. Young man's game. Unless I wanted to be in management, I didn't want to go to management. So I kind of circled around acupuncture too. I went to school similar to you in some ways, just like, does this shit really work? I mean, okay, they wrote this down in a book, but anybody can write anything in a book. So how do you find the reality of it?
And honestly, because I started out, 18 years old, I started meditating on my own. And then I, first was interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and then Zen Buddhism. And then I really followed it. Like I said, I did a 3-month retreat in Korea and then a 3-month retreat in the US. I've actually been rereading it recently, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So this whole idea of always pressing reset, right? Always coming back to the beginning, always keeping the truth very lightly in your hands, And so you have to have this absolute certainty and confidence in your, I would say, the phenomenological flow of your experience that comes from maximum attention, right? But also this complete detachment from the actual objects of thought that you have, and allowing them to be very provisional, to not get too excited. Writing, they say, kill your lovelies, right? You have to do that with your, all your ideas, feelings, thoughts, perceptions. It's like the Heart Sutra in Zen meditation. It's like you're killing all your lovelies of all perceptions, thoughts, feelings, everything. You're just, you see the Buddha in the road, you kill the Buddha. It's very, sounds very violent, but it's this blade of clarity, that you are constantly cutting down these reified objects that come from your thinking because of your attachment to them. And so I feel within Chinese medicine, the same way. And at the very beginning too, I had some very good texts that were put in front of me at NISA that talked about the history of Chinese medicine after the Communist Revolution and the way it was changed, the purging of certain aspects. Also, that looking at Chinese medicine as also a cultural product, right? So there are certain cultural assumptions within Chinese medicine that come out of its traditional practice within certain cultures that may not necessarily be essential to the practice of medicine. We'll just say that.
And it may not quite fit here, or even if it fits here. For example, in China, well, younger women these days, maybe so, but certainly middle-aged and older, when it's time for their period, they're not drinking icy cold drinks. I mean, they just don't do it. It's partly because it's in the culture.
Right. There's already an assumed knowledge that
it's assumed knowledge. And so in some ways, it's very easy to treat certain kind of menstrual disorders in Asia because you're sharing this common view. But you bring it here to America and suggest during your period, give up the ice cream. It has nowhere to land unless we start explaining Chinese medicine and give our patients kind of a Chinese medicine 101. But I don't think they're looking for that. They just want to feel better. So in some ways, the challenge is how do we take and explain through the models and metaphors and the languaging of Western physiological function, how this stuff works. And it's a bit of a challenge, but it can also be kind of fun. Take some creativity, I've discovered.
Yeah, I mean, the problem of importing Chinese medicine, I think, is twofold. The one is what we just discussed, which is how much of the practice of Chinese medicine is culturally bound coming from Asia. And then also how much is culturally indecipherable in our reception of it, right? And so the way that language determines how you think to a great extent, right? And so if you're in a language that has ideograms where different concepts are grouped together and have a certain richness or depth in the words because these ideograms have a history, they have resonances within them, and you compare that to a language that is completely atomic, like an alphabet, right? Where each letter has really no significance. It has no, and then you put letters together, they relate to the letters themselves, but there is no picture there. There's no history there within that is visible within a written word, right? You can already see that the ways that you would think in Chinese medicine, Asian medicine would be more analogical and more of a gestalt, to use an overused word, holistic. So there's a holism to a concept where you take the whole concept as a piece, which then you can expand and unfold, but it has a certain power of having this cohesive structure within it, as opposed to something that is completely reduced and atomized, which is Western medicine, right? You move everything down to its smallest part, and then it's like you're dissecting everything, and then you reassemble this Frankenstein out of this dissected pieces. And yeah, maybe that Frankenstein can move around, but the sum of the parts does not equal a whole living thing. And there's lots of holes. It's more of a Swiss cheese. There's lots of pieces missing, and also the variables. You can't solve an equation once you get up to a certain amount of variables. There's just not enough computing power in the world to do so. And so in Western medicine, you have this thing like, okay, here's 15 different drugs we're giving this person. How do those things interact? No one could ever tell you. There's no computer that could compute that for you, right? There's just too many variables to solve that equation. Whereas in Chinese medicine, you have this whole gestalt that you can use as an analytical tool that includes all these different things, all these different parts that connect with each other. And you can use that as a way to analyze that gives you a different kind of power than the reductive model, which also gives you a lot of power. There's a power to kind of sharpening things down to this knife-like blade, right? This atomic structure, but they're not the same. And so, how do you get past that? How do you make a bridge between those two things? That's going to vary so much because people are going to have different facilities. If you, for example, if you are very culturally familiar with China, where you speak Chinese, you could have a much more sophisticated understanding of the meanings of certain texts, for example, and their history and concepts and their richness. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily make you less blind to, say, certain cultural assumptions, right? Not necessarily.
And we're working within our culture. There was something you mentioned a few minutes ago about the Zen practice and about beginner's mind and this place of holding our concepts lightly. Of course, we have lots of concepts in Chinese medicine. In fact, it's our concepts that help us to come up with a diagnosis, and a good diagnosis will guide our treatment, and we're more likely to be helpful to our patients. And so concepts and the ability to work mental models, all very necessary, all very important, and at the same time, not get trapped inside the model even as we're using the model.
You have to think of even our diagnoses, right? And this was one of the reasons I was always uncomfortable in acupuncture school, was because from the very beginning, I read some texts just emphasizing how much these are essentially poetical analogies, right? These diagnostic categories we have, liver qi stagnation, phlegm harassing the heart, right? It's like all this stuff. But we tend to reify it when you hear acupuncturists speaking and talking about these things as if they are unconstructed, absolute real things there in the world. So holding them lightly means you understand that it's an image that points to something, right? That it's an idea, but like any idea, it has to find its way to the actual thing. Even within Chinese medicine, if you look at the contradictions between 5 phases and then yin-yang theory, they don't mesh completely, but use one sometimes, use the other sometimes. So just like we have quantum physics and relativistic physics, right? Use one at one scale, use another at another scale. We don't know how they fit together. These are all best working approximations that work within certain terrains or within certain value parameters very well. But there are many cases where you get outside those bounds and it might not cohere anymore, and the theory doesn't necessarily cover what you're seeing anymore. And so there's always this question, okay, am I just not good enough at this?
Or am I not seeing the whole picture? How do I more clearly see it?
Right, especially as a student, you're like, is this me, or is this the theory? Is this a place where Chinese medicine doesn't work, or am I just not good enough yet? Right? When 20 years will I see, oh yes, actually this is what this text means, and I can analyze this, and I am able to see this, and everything actually is exactly as the textbook says. So I mean, I'm 20 years on, and I still haven't solved that, and so I found my own way to try to find something within Chinese medicine that I could really believe in and start from there and kind of build from there. And for me, that was palpation. And that was finding correlations between needling and immediate changes I could feel in structure. Because, where structure, at least it's like a bone is either here or it's here, right? And that seems to be the clearest for me, almost binary determination of whether something actually happened, as opposed to pulse, right? Which is infinitely
subjective.
Yeah, exactly. Infinitely subjective. I mean, I've studied at least 4 different pulse systems, right? Because I was trying to find my home within it. And it turns out the one I'm most comfortable with is Japanese, because it's also very binary. It's like, which is the weakest, which is the strongest? There you go. And you base your root treatment on that. It's like pulse for dummies. Because everything else is like, I would overthink it. Am I projecting onto this? Am I imposing something on this? Am I, and I could never answer that question. And I could kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to tell myself this, and seems like this is, what's happening, but I was never really sure. Japanese have abdominal palpation where what's soft, what's firm, what's cold, what's hot. Even that was too much. How do I know if it's cold or hot? Unless it's really, really cold or really, really hot. But if you're talking about these subtle things, am I just imposing that? Am I just, the teacher says, oh, feel this is cold. I feel this, it's cold. Is it because the teacher just told me it was? I don't know. So I had to start with like the atom, like talking about going back to the atomic structure. I had to start with the most reductive atom of belief in Chinese medicine, which was, okay, I can feel the spine moving when I do certain things. Before it was out of alignment, now it's in alignment. And I did this with a distal point. So I'm like, okay, well that's something, right? That actually is, that's acupuncture working the way acupuncture is supposed to be working. It's just by a different metric than other people are measuring, probably because I was so incompetent at pulse, and I had such trouble, believing everything I read, that I had to create more work for myself to do something else to actually be able to feel good coming to work every day, that I wasn't wasting people's money and deluding myself.
Yeah, that piece about deluding ourselves, I think, is something a lot of us struggle with, especially in the first few years, especially when results may not be so great. We're doing our work. We're doing it the best we can. The books say it should be like this, but I'm looking at what's happening in clinic. Book is not matching clinic, right? Clinic is not matching theory. My reality is far from theory. That'll leave you in kind of a no man's land. I've seen other people make this stuff work. I've had it work on myself. I've had these brief, at times, glimpses of how powerful the medicine can be, and especially acupuncture, how powerful it can be. But to get it to reliably function well, that's another story. And again, you talk about pulses. I'm a little bit of dead wood when it comes to pulses. I mean, there's certain pulses I can feel, and there's actually certain pulses that will sort of speak to me. I can feel them quite easily. Sometimes I've discovered pulses that were not in any of the books. I've given them my own name. I just kind of recognize, oh, there's that ringing pulse. Okay, all right. What does that ringing pulse mean? Oh, that's up to me to figure out now. I can feel it. I may not know what it means, but I can feel it.
Well, from the very beginning, I was trying to think of, okay, what is really happening when people are feeling pulses, right? Going back to the shamanic and oracular beginnings of Chinese medicine, you'd have these scapulomancy. Scapulomancy. So taking an ox scapula, throwing it in the fire, and then the cracks in the ox scapula would give you a diagnosis of the spirit that was disturbing somebody, or cracks in a tortoise shell. Pulse is like that, right? Because it is a form of divination. And if we understand that, then we can understand the way that so many different pulse styles seem to give people information. Because you hear about these Chinese medicine doctors who can feel a pulse and tell you, oh, you broke your thumb when you were 2 years old. That's not a pulse shape that we learn. And so where do you get that? And why would 3 inches of radial pulse be giving you information about 12 meridians, 12 organ systems, qualities, all this sort of stuff? I mean, you can start to think about, okay, the acupuncture channels have a fractal structure, which I think is actually true when you start looking at distal points. Especially like the Tong system or Richard Tan's balance method. It's like you can always shrink things and work from a smaller section, and that will become a synecdoche of the whole thing, that will become a microsystem for the whole thing. And then you can shave that and use a smaller microsystem. So, it's possible that it's that, but I also think that the pulse becomes a focus of attention. And anytime you have a focus of attention where you are really tuning in to what's going on, the mind calms, the senses heighten, and then you can see things that you couldn't see before with a clarity that you can believe. And I think the pulse is a way of focusing the mind. You dive deeper and deeper into it, your mind creates these images and then is doing a lot of work for you underneath the hood, connecting the history or connecting what you're seeing with the person, connecting the vibe even. And then you come up with these diagnoses, and the sort of provisional shapes that you're given, the provisional pulse system that you're given, gives you, it's like you're like this climbing gym where you're given handholds to go onto. And then you go, it's like, but really, of course, you're on this face that has many different ways you could go, many things that may seem like a place to put your hand and then you could slip, but it's not built for you. You're using it, but it's not built for you. If someone comes to you, their system is not built for you to understand it. But if you have these hermeneutics for understanding things, you can use that as a way to focus so that you can actually see the stuff that is sort of in between those things and make sense of it. But I also think too, if you don't hold it too lightly, if you're really orthodox about it, you have this power because, we talked about analytical power before. There's a power to being a true believer, to being truly orthodox, to being like, I'm a classical this, I do this, this is like what I do. You're whole hog. You believe in it completely. It allows you to go forward and go through the ambiguity and go through your doubt, right? And you can maybe go with things or push further than you might if you're holding back or hesitant. But on the other hand, you risk imposing a shape onto something that doesn't fit it. You're drawing legs on the snake, as they say in Zen. There's the thing, and you have to do something to make it work in your mind, and then that's what you prescribe for the patients based on that. And so, there's room for practitioners who are coming things more elliptically, obliquely, and incorporating other things. You just have to understand that there's pros and cons, right? To both approaches, to both stances, and you don't really even have a choice. If you're the type of person who's full of doubt, that's just who you are. If you're the type of person who finds something and you believe in it completely, and you just barrel forward and break through walls, like this juggernaut that you just keep on going through the theory. You're great with it. It's powering you. That's who you are. You don't have any choice. You can't choose to be one or the other. You can understand that there are people in there kind of like have their other way of being wonderful in the world, but that's not you. And so you have to find your own way of making things work and helping people. And you bring in other things that might not be in your textbooks or might not be within Chinese medicine. Or in my case, I actually feel like are actually fundamental to Chinese medicine. They just come from before Chinese medicine was Chinese medicine, right? The shamanic origins of Chinese medicine. It's like the one before it becomes the two in Taoism. It's like, so before it splits up and becomes the Yellow Emperor's classic, before it becomes all these theories, before it multiplies into words and thoughts, there is this prehistorical healing that goes on and perception that goes on. And so I feel like I've had to rewind all the way back to that to find another exit point for myself to come out that was maybe parallel to the Chinese medicine that was written down, which of course we don't know complete Chinese medicine. So much was secret, so much may have been lost. There could have been thousands of practitioners who do what I do. They just didn't talk about it, because if you talked about it, then someone else would do it, and maybe you'd lose all your patients to them. So who knows what actually happened in history? But I felt like I had to go with something that brought me to a place, regardless of what was written down, because we know that that's all histories are partial, and all thinking has holes in it. All paradigms are incomplete, and you don't know that until you get to some other paradigm that enfolds this other one where you can see it's.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. And it's often like these interlocking Russian dolls. You have something, it may be complete within itself, but it's not complete within the universe. There's something else that it's within. All these embedded wheels.
Right. So talking about like terrains or sets of values or parameters within which this works really well.
So I want to come back to terrains, and I want to come back to ambiguity and doubt. And I want to hear more about the shamanistic aspect, because I've got I've got a horse in the race, so to speak, because I remember as a kid in high school, I loved that Carlos Castaneda stories. Those were fantastic. And then I remember reading something about like Russian shamans and things, and I thought, you know what? I hope I never have to have that as a job. On one hand, I remember having this very sort of glorified image of, like a true medicine person. And then I got this glimpse that, oh my gosh, the work that you got to do, the shadow that you've got to learn to eat, the way that you've woven your world together to be able to unravel it enough to let this other stuff in, that does not sound like an easy path to follow. That's just my perspective, fears. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it's one of the things that's always kept me away from wanting to get too close to that stuff, because that looked like a not easy row to hoe.
Well, the funny thing is about it is you're never close to it until you find yourself inside it. So when you start to get into this weirder stuff, this more inexplicable stuff, for me, I was extremely skeptical because I was, for reasons having to do with my own childhood, my own mother was a tarot card reader, right? And so, growing up, like I was like, okay, she always had trouble being in the world. Like she was like the plane that she was working on didn't mesh well with paying bills and that sort of thing. So I was very determined to be rooted in the world, be rooted in experience, be very honest about what I could perceive or not perceive, and understand my own process. And so I think that's what led me to Zen, was like, how does the mind work? How does perception work? How do the senses turn into perceptions of real things? And how do we know that they're real? And of course, I was also very much interested in neurology. I was interested in science. I was interested in philosophy, really understanding how all this worked, and being very skeptical of anything that was new age or anything where people started talking about chakras. They started talking about astral traveling, astral planes, all this sort of stuff, right? And the bullshit meter goes off the charts, and I think it should. Your first duty is to doubt completely. Don't stop, really, until there is something there that you find it very hard to deny. And then your next duty is to not kind of put the doubt down, but to hold it next to this thing that you're experiencing and try to have both simultaneously. And that is the difficult thing. It's similar in meditation practice, if anyone's ever done any meditation practice, where you are observing your thoughts but not engaging with them, and somehow thinking while not thinking, right? And so if you've ever been deep in meditation where you realize you're understanding things, but you even realize that realization of understanding things is not in words. And as soon as that happens, you realize, oh, those were the words. And then you let those go, and then you still understand everything. And it's just these different frames that go by each other, and almost like frames of a movie where you can see the individual frames and they start moving fast enough. It forms this whole picture that is beyond these divided little cells of thinking and stuff. And so you get this hum of perception that seems to encompass all these things without breaking them up or assuming anything about them. Zen Master Dogen said, the bird outside my window is not a bird, therefore it is a bird. And what that means is that as soon as you name something, you deny its specificity in this moment in time in all its qualities, right? You've imposed something generic upon it that makes you see it less. And it's the same idea as beginner's mind, really, right? When you have some kind of experience, and some people will have some kinds of experiences and some people won't. And if you haven't, then absolutely 100% doubt that they've ever happened, right? You just have to, because otherwise you enter the world of charlatans, because there are plenty of narcissists and other assorted personality disordered folks who will take advantage of people who might have some little corner on wisdom, but then blow it up to become this monstrous thing that is the opposite of wisdom, right? But might have some kind of charismatic power. Or people take one thing and they're like, oh, wow, the world as I knew it was not complete. There's things that happen that can't be explained, and that maybe science is wrong about, this, and these things can happen. And then they generalize it to believe that everything is real, right? That every fringe thing is real, that every alternative medicine thing is real, that everything you see on the internet that's being sold to you, every device or every... So it's like if one thing they told me was wrong is real, maybe everything is real, and that's also not real, right? That also does not follow. You cannot generalize there. There might be a few things that science has missed so far, right? But it doesn't mean that if you imagine it, it's real. But sometimes if you imagine something, it is real. How do you know?
Well, I think I see this in clinic all the time with my patients, that I will come up with an idea of what's going on for them. It seems like a good idea. I do a treatment. They get worse. What does that mean? I was wrong about that. Now I have more information. In fact, if I've done a very targeted treatment, now I've got good information because we've gone in a direction that was not helpful. How do I know that's real? Because their back pain is worse and they are now nauseous or something like that. So that's more information. It's new data points, a chance to look at my own perception, my own mental models and go, if these things are also true, what else is going on here?
Mm-hmm. And of course, there are those interesting cases where, and I see them almost exclusively with either workers' comp or with spouses who have brought in, especially male spouses who've been brought in, where as soon as they get better, they get worse. And then they don't come back.
As soon as they get better, they get worse.
Yeah. It's like there's almost this panic of improvement. And especially in the workers' comp cases, the healing is not, you can't abstract the body and the mind from the entire life and situation. So if someone is depending on feeling bad for their livelihood or their sense of self for certain benefits, if you make them too good, they lose all that, right? So their not getting better is the reason they're coming. They need to confirm that one more thing is also not helping them, and therefore they are stuck. They are in the situation, they are hopeless, which in that situation is actually the best possibility in terms of their perception, right? And that may be real in that moment or not. That can happen too. So sometimes people get bad and you're scratching your head and you don't understand why. But, or say a spouse comes in, right? You treat the wife, she drags in the husband. The husband looks at you like sideways, right? The next time you see him, he has this satisfied gleam in his eye. It's like, nope, don't feel any better. Treat him a couple more times. You can almost see this smirk, this psychic smirk, like, nope, don't feel better. And so this is like one more thing he can say, I told you so, right? So that's like a situation in which the wrong outcome that you're intending, they're not getting better, is the best outcome for them.
This is really interesting, and I hadn't thought about this until you just bring it up, especially if someone's on workman's comp, and maybe they're getting some good money on workman's comp.
And of course, I don't mean to say blanket. I've had cases get better, but by far that population is the one where I have the lowest success rate. Unless they were prior patients who came to me who then had an accident, then they're in workers' comp, and then they come to me, and then it's just like any other injury. But typically you get someone, they've been through the mill, they've year or two on from their injury, and they're enmeshed in the system and they're referred to you. And so there's an entire history that you are peripheral to, and you're just one more piece. You're not the thing that's going to help them. You're just one more piece of this complicated tapestry that they are moving through,
How do you work with those folks?
Good question. I haven't solved it. Sometimes you can ask the question, right? What would you do if all your pain went away? How would your life change? That may or may not open a door. If it's subconscious, right? If it's just a subconscious block, that might. If they're consciously doing this, right? If they're consciously gaming the system, for instance, and trying to keep their benefits or their medication, they're trying to keep their Vicodin prescription, or they are traumatized by their job. They don't want to go back to a job that injured them, where they're going to be working themselves to death and end up on disability anyway in their 50s or 60s because, their job is incredibly hard and physically brutal. You get somebody who gets injured, they have trauma, they don't want to go back to their job. And maybe there's no other job they can do. We think, oh, you can find another job. Below a certain income or training level, your options are few and slim. Like that job that hurt you might be your best option. But if that's your best option, the next best option might not be working at all. And so I would have to usher in fully automated luxury communism in order to really heal you because your situation is enmeshed in socioeconomic structures that make a certain kind of suffering preferable to the other kinds of suffering you could have. And so I am just part of this bureaucracy for you. But I'm sure there are people who have a subconscious, they actually do want to go back. They want to get through this thing. And you could probably help them. It's just, I don't want to impose that on people. I always come to them like, you are coming in because you want to be helped. And I'm going to help you. I'm the thing that you tell me you want to be helped, right? And I don't tend to pry. I tend to come at things fairly gingerly. I don't try to take control of people's health. I really try to meet them wherever they are. And a lot of that's too, like I prior to being in Denver now, I was in Southwest Colorado in a really remote rural area in the Four Corners in Montezuma County. And, it's a lower level of education, a lower income level. Vast majority of my patients worked with their bodies and hands. And so it's a different situation down there. People traditionally have not been as gung-ho about changing their lifestyle. It's like, I'm not going to get most of these people to do Qigong and eat bitter melon, right?
I mean, do any of us really want to change our lifestyle? I mean, when you come right down to it.
People often, Chinese medicine people who are, into doing all from perspective of people outside of it, very extreme stuff and weird fringe stuff to keep ourselves healthy. And we seem really neurotic. My wife thinks I'm a complete hypochondriac. Maybe I am, but also it's because I'm always like, okay, what's the Chinese medicine theory about what's going on right now? Let me try this, right? So we're always experimenting on ourselves, and we're always hyper vigilant and aware of the smallest, minutest details of our health. To most people, that seems like a pain in the ass. To most people, it's like, you just want to drive your car. You don't want to be tinkering with it constantly, but there are people who love tinkering with cars. So we have a particular obsession with bodies that a lot of people don't have. But I mean, I think even in places where cultural cohesion, you're living in a city and like most people you see are strangers. You live in a town of 12,000. You've seen everybody's face after a while, right? You might not know them, but you've seen them. And so cultural cohesion is, comes from the foods you eat and the things you do. And if you start to get weird, people are really going to notice it. So there's no place to hide, right? So I think, places like that, changing lifestyle is harder. So then I guess my point is that I came to meet people where they were, and if someone just wanted their elbow fixed, I would just fix their elbow. I'd see all the other stuff in them. I might mention a couple things, but really it was fairly hands off unless someone started to say, oh, can you help this? Oh, can you help this? And I was like, sure. You might have to quit smoking though. You might have to eat vegetables. You might have to do more exercise than simply house cleaning, which is great. Chores are great, but you're going to have to do something besides just your work. What do you do for exercise? Oh, I feed cows. It's like, okay, yeah. And I mean, it's exhausting, right? It definitely feels like exercise to like work on a farm or a ranch. And I explain, well, if you're doing it for your own survival, that's going to do different things in your mind and body than if you're doing it just for its own sake.
Really interesting study that I heard about where they took maids in a hotel and they split them into two groups. One group was given instructions on like how to lift in certain ways to protect their back or whatever. And the other group was given this suggestion and this idea about how their work was exercise. And because they were walking this many miles a day, and because they were squatting this much, and because they were using their body in a particular way, they were actually doing good things for their body. They were kind of a workout. And then they came and checked their weight and blood chemistry and all that kind of stuff a few months later. And the ones who had in their mind that this is beneficial for my health, the work I do is beneficial for my health,
Right.
showed
Right.
benefit.
So same thing, different idea. The idea changes your posture, changes what's happening in your mind, which of course changes what's happening in your body, and which then starts to change everything in a very linked, holistic way. And so I guess for me, I had to really work with people wherever they were and try to tread carefully culturally with things. But it also, in a way, for me, it was nice for a while because it's like it was very uncomplicated. I didn't have to get into stuff with people. It's like, oh, fix my elbow. I can fix your elbow. But then, of course, there are those cases where you're doing the simple thing that usually works and it doesn't work, and you're really scratching your head. And then you're looking, oh, they're depressed. Oh, they have really, high inflammation. They have diabetes. They have all these other things. And it's like, okay, actually, we do have to go into these deeper stuff. Oh, actually, Chinese medicine theory. I really actually have to do some internal medicine stuff here.
But it's nice when you don't have to. When I was in the 8th grade, I had a shop class, which I loved because we made stuff with our hands. We got to play with fire and saws and nails and all that good stuff. And the teacher would always tell us, he was like a mantra. We'd hear it every day, right tool for the right job, boys. And I suspect it's the case with our clinics as well. Sometimes it's just an elbow issue. Maybe that elbow issue is actually attached to the rest of their particular universe in a very profound way, but maybe it's not. And if it's not, perhaps a bit of acupuncture will help. But if it's actually really attached to the rest of the universe in a pivotal way, okay, now that's a different terrain that we have to
Yeah,
work
and
with.
I mean, to kind of paraphrase Freud, sometimes an elbow is just an elbow, right?
Exactly.
I just want to bracket one thing because just talking about in terms of meeting people where they are and treating the part rather than the whole and tools, this sort of thing. Really getting into the shamanic stuff and kind of working internally with people, working with more psycho-emotional, spiritual, or karmic stuff. That's been happening more since COVID, and so I'm even now, like after a long time, after 20 years, starting to get different interests and perspectives here. And I used to be just really content with just, hey, I can work all day. I can treat 40 people a week doing elbows, make a good living, and do it in 3 days. In my free time, I can like make music or write books or whatever. And now actually my work itself and my interests have gotten closer and closer and closer to the point where like my meditation practice, my medicine practice, all of it is feeding back into itself and in a holistic way. So that's kind of changed. So in terms of connecting different parts, like my elbow is now connected to the rest of my body much more than it was before in my practice. So I don't know if that is going to impact what you wanted to ask me about, but I wanted to have that thought before we moved on.
Great. And thank you for the reminder that, well, our medicine is deeply integrative between heaven, earth, and person, and between our internal environment and our external environment, our relationships. I mean, yes, at one level, we can just look at elbows. At the same time, we know that elbows are also connected to the rest of the body, and the rest of that body is connected to a family and a social system and an economic system, thunderstorms and tornadoes and ocean tides and everything else. So there's that, and we can get into that at another time. I think that would be a juicy conversation. What I would like to know a bit more about from your perspective is this idea of intention. So this is something, and I hear this a lot in our profession about, well, the most important thing in a treatment is your intention. And I often feel like an idiot because sometimes I don't know the difference between intention and wishful thinking, or and hoping, or intention and, well, I've got an agenda because I want to feel good about who I am and the work that I do. So it seems whenever I hear that word intention, all of a sudden I feel like the gravity's gotten a little bit less. It's like I'm walking on thin, slippery black ice.
Right. And my hand always goes to my pocket to make sure my wallet's still there if I, see someone talking about it online. There's a lot of links to that in this, greater new age kind of prosperity gospel. If you think it becomes real universe we have going on in the wellness community, right? And new age spirituality, all that stuff. And not that it's completely wrong. There's something to it. But if the intention comes out of ego, then it is just another construction. It's just another want. And it is, you can be so focused on it, right? So let's deflect from intention to attention. Because I feel like intention without attention it's an inert thing. It's a tool that can be used for anything and is not necessarily good, because plenty of intentions can be followed and they don't lead to good places in the end for people, because there's so much attachment to that intention that it's used as a sword or battering ram to break through everything or everyone that would get in its way.
Can you give me an example of that?
Your intention is to become the greatest Chinese medicine practitioner ever, right? What that becomes is a guru kind of complex where you start to convince people that they need to spend more and more. You increase your prices a lot. You create dependencies in people. You are taking control of their lives, and you find new ways to monetize and to increase your margins so that you become more and more well-known or more wealthy, right? And have a bigger and bigger clinic and have more clinics. And the number of clinics and number of patients becomes the signifier of how good a provider you are. And so that would be a situation where the intention is so latched to this unexamined ego, right? This unexamined self, that it becomes this mech robot that it's living within, this exoskeleton that just starts barreling through life and can become very destructive. And you often see with that kind of trajectory that there becomes some kind of scandal. There's a money scandal. There's a sex or harassment scandal. There's something that happens, that some Achilles heel, that just the self wants the burden of being free of itself.
The self wants the burden of being free of itself.
So the self, I think even in people who are really attached to their selves, they will create their own destruction at some point to solve that attachment, to learn humility, especially if they're in a field that does emphasize attention and requires humility. And so, so intention without attention. So I really want to kind of circle back to the more metaphysically, right? And metaphysically, I mean actually more practically.
Yeah. How does this unfold in our work with our patients?
Right. And so this idea of holding it lightly, side tangent, here's a koan for you. Can a robot practice acupuncture?
That's a modern koan.
Right. So, because is this just a mechanical insertion of a needle to a certain depth in the right place for the right condition that could be algorithmically decided by signs and symptoms? Or is that all an excuse for us to pour on the juice of our attention, right? And connect with that person and vibrate from one nervous system to the other. Our vagus nerves, the third higher primate branch of the nervous system nobody else has, that is completely social and that determines this health of our immune system based on social cues and group dynamics, right? How much of what's happening in our medicine is that? And everything else is an excuse to order it and believe in it and interact with more of the kind of matter, more of the meat and potatoes, the meat and bones. But this spirit that animates it is always trying to find a way in to work. And so that's all of our medicine, is a way of just ordering this energy, ordering this chi through these patterns of medicine, patterns of body, patterns of flesh. And a robot can't do that. But maybe it could do something, right? And so maybe sticking a needle mechanically in certain places could conceivably do something. And that, of course, confuses things, right? You could imagine that that could be true. And so how much is, intention doing here? How much is just the technique itself and knowledge and just, it's an open question. So that's where attention comes from. That's where like being aware of everything that's happening when it's happening as much as you can really comes in. So you can explore this question, because I think it's a great question. What does intention do? If you've solved that, if you have an answer to that question, then you've killed it. You really have, because that is actually, what is intention is actually a practice that is the intention itself. It's the practice itself, and the questioning of the practice is the practice, because it keeps it alive.
So could you say that intention is the practice of attention?
Intention is in dialectical synthesis with attention, right? So you have an intention, you pay attention, then you understand if your intention was the correct intention or not, and where it was coming from. And then it might need to be altered to some new intention that is also provisional. It's like this asymptote that we're always approaching. It's sharpening this blade, right? And getting more and more refined, and it goes back and forth. It has to always go back and forth. It has to always be reflected upon. And there are different ways of doing that. It's like whether it's meditation or qigong or scholarship even, It's like in Tibetan Buddhism, they have the Dzogchen people who are almost like, Zen, where it's very like direct perception. And they have the Gelugpa people who are scholars, and they become enlightened by just, mostly by studying, by kind of getting into the depths of this study so intensely that it breaks through their minds, and they have this enlightenment. So different minds can have access to this dialectic different ways, I think for some people who have very busy minds, simpler stuff is better. So that's kind of why I ended up in Zen, because it's you and a floor. And so you have this stark, impenetrable wall of this is all there is. And then somehow by starting there, it opens the entire universe in some really interesting and painful way. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And, but I think because I started there, when this idea of compassion, helping all beings, it's always a question of, okay, what's the wisdom part? How do I do that? And I don't necessarily think that there's any one way. And so I'm always open to finding new pathways that I think might be helpful, and then also questioning whether they are really helpful. That's kind of my practice. And these days it's leading me in some really interesting ways, like doing distance work with people, and that's very free form. I don't have any guidelines when I'm working on people.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
I'd love to hear some about the distance healing, the distance work that you're doing. I know when COVID first came along, I was doing some herbal consultations online, and I was seeing some of my patients, partly because they just wanted someone to talk to. I remember doing some things like some acupressure with them, and it was incredibly unsatisfactory for everybody involved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of telling them, okay, press here, and they would press on themselves, right?
And that just didn't do anything
Right.
for people except make them wish that they could come in for acupuncture.
Right.
So I'd love to hear something about the distance work that you're doing.
Sure. Sure. It's kind of like acupuncture. I was on this balance beam that was like 3 feet off the floor, and you're trying to stay on this thing, pay attention so that you can figure out what's going on with your patients and you treat them, but you feel like you're not that far off. You're up in this world of chi, but you can still see the ground. It's right here. And I've given that up when you're doing distance work. It's like I'm on the tightrope. It's like I'm way up there. There's no net, and it's very freeform. And so I didn't advertise myself as like, oh, I'm going to start doing shamanic healing energy medicine with you. I just told my patients, hey, I can work with pain and some issues during this COVID lockdown. So everybody can have a free session. Just try it out, and if it's for you, then we can keep on trying. And I had a few patients take me up on it, and then they actually preferred it. And I had a couple who tried it and liked it, but still wanted me to work on them. And then I started to get other people who were referred, and now I have a bunch of people that's kind of people who are referring each other. So a growing number of people who are completely outside my regular patients who I'm doing this. Basically, we're acupuncturists, so this is not acupuncture, so it's coaching, which is like what you can do when you don't want to go on your acupuncture license and get in trouble because you're not, you can't. This is not intended to cure any disease, right? I'm just I'm giving you coaching. I'm telling you what to do. What phenomenologically is happening is I'm sitting there and I might be explaining what I'm doing, but mostly and this is something that happened when I started working on people's spines, where at one point I noticed that I would know where their spine was going to be pointing, where their misalignments were before I put my hand on them. I knew what I was going to find. And I didn't even know that that's what was happening. It's just one of those things where like, I was just kept on being not surprised. And I was like, okay, let's be a little bit more, programmatic about this. Let's be more scientific about this. How far away can I know what's going to be happening? And then I started like writing down, okay, someone comes in, and I write down, okay, what's going on with their spine, and then I palpate and be like, oh, wow, okay. And then I started doing it over the phone. And they would come in, and I would check what was going on and verify that that's what was going on. The first one, I was like, okay, there's some cue I'm seeing, there's some electromagnetic thing my body's picking up on, but over the phone, I mean, like, okay, quantum entanglement. What is going on here from a rational perspective that this can happen? And so, but it kept on happening. And I was like, okay, I have to honor the phenomenology of this, even though I'm as skeptical of this as I can be, but I'm just going to play with it. It turn into a game. It's just, this is fun. Let's pretend this is really happening. And then one day I was walking in the neighborhood with my wife, and she was complaining about neck pain. I've worked on it a million times. And I was like, okay, I can see, okay, C7's going to the left, C1's going to the right. And I was like, hold on one second. And then I imagined pressing points on her kidney channel that I would normally use in clinic to correct those. And I was like, move your head around. She's like, oh, yeah, it doesn't hurt. And then I went and I palpated, and it was straight. And I was like, okay. And then, I did this with a few friends, and then with my patients, I would basically start treating them before I put the needles in, not telling them that I was doing it. I just like, okay, start to treat. I'd palpate. I would sit there for a second, in my mind, start doing the acupuncture needles on their body, and then see what would happen. And talking about intention, the actual doing the treatment in my mind, feeling the pressure on there, basically modeling it as if I were feeling pressure, like doing acupressure on them or something, or feeling like the sensation you get of chi in the needle that you can feel through the needle, feeling that in my mind and in my basically my projection of my body in my mind, this sort of somatic muscle memory, like feeling that, what it felt like pressing those points, feeling when they would change, and then I would verify. And so then during COVID, I just decided, let me just try this with people. And so I'd have people who had never seen me before, who would get referred by other people, and they would, tell me, oh, I've got some neck pain, some back pain. I would see what was going on with their spine. I would do an acupuncture treatment, including the Japanese root. Say, okay, we're dealing with a kidney pattern. Okay, we got a spleen pattern here. Tell me about your digestion. And then I would see different things here and work on it, basically doing this virtual acupuncture treatment. And I also have some training in craniosacral therapy, which was kind of one gateway into sort of how I was able to feel points. And so I would do that with people. And then all kinds of really interesting stuff would come up with childhood stuff, with I would get images of things that happened and then I started to see, I was like, okay, well, we're going to pretend right now that I'm seeing a past life, because I'm seeing this person and this is what's going on. And then they're dying in this particularly terrible way, or they're struggling with this, or they're an alcoholic, or something like that. And I would just say, okay, do with this what you will. This is what I'm seeing right now. And basically presenting it as, I don't really know what this is. I'm just seeing this. If this is meaningful to you, that's great. If it's nonsense, it might be total nonsense. And so just allowing it to be go wherever it goes. And so, of course, I talk about this and I'm like, I have no way to justify this, but it's enough that people keep on calling me back and tell other people to call me. And so we do it. It's some kind of exploration that people are doing with me that I'm learning a lot from, and that I feel honored to do with people. Because we're doing something that's very strange, that requires a lot of trust, and is also completely speculative, off the deep end. But they seem to feel something is profound happening, because they can't explain it either, and it feels very real to them. And there seems to be a strong correlation between what I see, what I think I'm doing, and then what they feel. Which, to have a little bit of magic in your life is, can be wonderful. And then especially if it's also grounded in a philosophy and practice of paying attention, as opposed to telling a story, telling a narrative to take over their life. I'm not saying, oh, okay, here's the story of your life. This is what you're doing. This is what you have to go do. These things are out of balance with you because of this thing that happened in your life and this sort of thing. There's a little bit of that, but it's mostly just, I'm paying attention. They're talking to me. I see things. I tell them what I'm seeing. I think of doing something in my mind. I do that. I ask them to give me feedback. And it's really this feedback, this kind of, back and forth thing. I feel like whatever it is, it's a legitimate use of our time together. But I don't advertise that I do anything. I don't impose anything on it. It's extremely open-ended in terms of what's happening and what I'm doing. I just say, this is what I see. This is what is going through my mind. And tell me what happens. How I do it, I have...
Does this tie in with the shamanic training? Yes. Does this tie... And I suspect it ties in with a lot of time on the cushion as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned, John Meyerson. So I actually got back in touch with him during quarantine, started kind of weekly. We've been working with each other in more of a mentorship than a doctor-patient relationship, which is more what we had before. He's a trained psychotherapist as well as an acupuncturist, martial arts master, and he co-founded the New England School of Acupuncture in 1975. And was the guy that signed all of our acupuncture licenses for the Board of Medicine. He's a very interesting, wonderful guy, but he taught this 3-hour class at NISA. And the most interesting thing about the class was that I couldn't not pay attention to him, because there's some energy coming out of him that was beyond anything he was talking about, that was nothing like I'd ever experienced. And that's not something he talked about either. It's just something that I noticed. And so sitting with him, the practice with him was, I would go in, sit on the couch. It was from the outside, it looked like psychotherapy, but we weren't really talking about that much in terms of what was going on with me. We talk about whatever, the weather. And then after about 5-10 minutes, the air would change color, and his face would start changing in other faces. And I couldn't, and then after that, he would say something really kind of spooky, okay, now we've begun. And then half an hour later, I'd be paying him and we'd be rescheduling. And so what that did for me, he didn't give me some he didn't tell me to go out and do all these different practices. It was some kind of induction resonance, like a magnet next to a wire. He's like a giant, this electromagnet of energy, and was just shaking things loose, just like moving my chi, just like clearing the channels. And what I found first was that all sorts of intuition, I started to really believe in my intuition much more. I didn't give up my thinking mind, right? But I just felt better about following or believing in intuitions I had. That translated into creative work in terms of writing all sorts of things, but then it also translated into my acupuncture too. And I think that's kind of like his practice with me was allowing me to believe in whatever intuitions I was capable of, to really honor them and see them, perceive them, and believe in them. But of course, I wasn't going to give up my skeptical mind. So I did, resist in a lot of ways the stuff that I would feel for a long time. But, so I'd approach it in small ways, like with the acupuncture. Like, I didn't do this distance stuff for 15 years after I noticed I could perceive things at a distance, because I couldn't justify that to people, right? And I had to stay in the realm of the real. And I had to, so it informed what I did, but I still was really like, from the outside, everything is just me sticking needles in people, just like any other acupuncturist, and palpating their spine to make sure that the actual real body is changing. But there was all sorts of other stuff that I was allowing myself to see that influenced what I did. I just didn't say that's what I was doing,
It seems to me that our perceptive senses do two things simultaneously. On one hand, it opens up a world to us. On the other hand, it makes us blind to everything that the senses can't touch. So it opens a world and it closes a world at the same time. And then you put mind in there. Now we've got stories about all this. We've got a name for something. Names are very, very useful, especially when you're dealing with other human beings, and especially when you're trying to pass along an idea or a concept. Names are super helpful, but they also, much like the perceptive senses themselves, they let you see a piece of what something is, and they blind you to the rest of whatever it is, or it might be. And it sounds like in this work that you've been doing, that membrane between what's named and what's unnameable, it's become semi-permeable.
Right. Is the bird outside your window a bird or not a bird? Right.
Yeah. The bird I see outside the window, is it the same as the bird the cat sees? We're both sitting there together looking at it.
Yeah. That moment where something goes from not being into being, or being into not being, real into not real into real, that's the moment you want to stay in as much as you can. Right. That is like the alive moment. And that is the place where things happen. It's like that hinge. It's in Zhuangzi, not Lao Tzu, but I think it's Zhuangzi, talks about this sort of like hinge or pivot. He has this cook that can butcher a pig and finds all the space in the joints and just moves through. And it's this like, it's the space between the joints. It's the space that you're going into. And this is this liminal space between where things are about to get solidified. And so always trying to like find your way back to there. The moment where the bird is both a bird and not a bird. It's like the particle and the wave at the same time, but not either. Not one, not two. That's the place you're always trying to stay. And I think as much as you can stay in that space as possible, the more you can navigate through the theories and practices and your intention and your successes and also your failures. And making sense of it and turning it into, it's nice to have a narrative about it, but it's even better to have a practice and a direction, because we can always tell ourselves stories, but it's what you do in the world that really matters.
I think that's just a fine place to leave this for today.
All right.
Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. It's great talk.
As the prolific science fiction writer Isaac Asimov said, the most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, but, that's funny. When we notice something odd, when something disrupts the pattern of what we expect, even when we don't know what it means, and perhaps especially when we don't know what it means, there's an opportunity to learn something new. There's only so much that we can learn from books or other people. At a certain point, we need to attend to our experience and work out our own understanding. Next week, show number 200. I am so grateful to all the practitioners who have shared their time and experience here on Qiological over the past 3.5 years. Their perspectives and methods give us a glimpse into the richness and diversity of thought and practice that we call East Asian medicine. The guest of show number 200 is a student, and we'll be talking about learning, mentorship, and challenges and opportunities of the next generation of practitioners. The influence of East Asian medicine is here to stay in the West. I actually had a patient the other day refer to acupuncture as a mainstream modality. How about that? Hearing that rather set me back on my heels for a moment. The new practitioners of today come into a vastly different world than those of us that started our practices in the 80s or 90s. Learning the medicine is one thing. How we unfold it into the world is an ever-changing opportunity and challenge. Tune in again next week, friends, for this 200th Qiological Conversation. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.